Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you very much for having us. So I'm Harley Geiger, and I am counsel at Venable LLP. I'm an attorney that focuses on cybersecurity law and policy, so incident response, product counseling, artificial intelligence, and a variety of other security and policy matters.
Hi, Harley. Thanks so much, and hello to everybody. I'm Sabeen Malik. I'm the Vice President of Global Government Affairs and Public Policy at Rapid7. So just to really, kind of set the scene for what we're going to be talking about today, we're going to be talking a little bit about incident response overview, incident response components, reporting plans, which will be the bulk of what we talk about, and then incident response requirements in various different regulations, and of course, kind of focusing on PCI version 4.0, and then other different areas where you'll see some overlap there too, and then some practical takeaways for you to leave this conference so that you can implement these things when you go back to your respective organizations.
Now, it should go without saying that this is not legal advice. Lawyers are wonderful. You should have one, but not from this presentation, please. And does the clicker work?
There you
It does.
go. Wonderful. So as you guys can see, there's an incident response kind of overview plan as you think about the different steps. There's preparation, detection and analysis, containment, eradication, recovery, and post-incident activity. But really, the takeaway here is that incident response is a critical component of any organization's cybersecurity strategy, and it involves a coordinated effort between various different teams and departments to detect, analyze, and respond. And what we're really going to be focusing on is kind of these coordinated efforts and kind of how should you set up your response in a way that is both productive, helps to coordinate all the different teams, and then helps you get to where you need to with your plan.
And so these are just a few common components of incident response plans. And you'll see that these are consistent not only in PCI DSS 4.0, but across regulations as well. So having incident management, roles and responsibilities is a really important part of any incident response plan. And incident management, having somebody that is designated to make sure that all of the moving parts are coordinating and executing on the plan is one of the more crucial roles. When an incident occurs, there has to be an enterprise incident investigation, right? So this can include looking at the different assets across the organization to see which ones are compromised and what the extent of that compromise might be. Technical analysis is once you find indicators of compromise, what is the nature of that compromise? This can include, for example, malware forensics and other technical analysis in order to determine what your mitigation is, and it determines what your response is going to be. Incident scoping, this is usually about how many assets are affected, where those assets are located, and how severe the compromise is. And that then, once you have your scoping, there's often a crisis communications component to the plan. This involves not only communicating with your internal stakeholders, but also external as well. So your employees, as well as potentially clients, investors, regulators, the media, and occasionally the public at large. Always, whenever there's an incident, there are legal and regulatory concerns. This can include shielding your organization from class action lawsuits, as well as increasingly not only breach notification requirements, but cyber incident reporting requirements as well. And then, for every incident, there are key decisions that must be made by senior leadership during crucial times, particularly during major incidents. So increasingly, we see that this includes: do we pay a cybersecurity, a cyber extortionist? Do we pay a ransom in the case of a ransomware, or not? Is this a material event, which will require for a public company engagement with the Securities and Exchange Commission? And then on the tail end of that incident, reporting and remediation. So recovery, sometimes these involve backups, making sure those backups are not corrupted, and reporting out to regulators as needed.
So an IR plan delineates what steps needs to be taken and by whom, and when a breach or security crisis occurs in an organization. Making sure that having a robust plan that establishes roles and responsibilities is probably really a key here in terms of making sure that everybody knows what they need to do. You don't want to make a plan in the middle of a crisis. If there's one takeaway, that's probably the main one. So helping to establish and prevent slow responses is basically built on the fact that you have roles and responsibilities laid out and that detailed steps can be taken. Obviously, you want to coordinate multiple work streams because, as Harley mentioned in the previous slide, there are different elements here in terms of what stakeholders need to know, who needs to be involved, at what stage do they need to be involved, and you're going to be managing teams both internal and external. And then helping to ensure that you have decision making at the right levels with the right people through the right mechanisms. You obviously want to make sure that at some point in time, even when not in the middle of a crisis, that these teams have some working knowledge of each other, making sure that they know who the other people are that they're going to be working with, who maybe even your third-party vendors are that are going to be helping you through this process is really important. So taking the time to make sure that when you're not in the middle of the incident, but actually in your response plan as you're planning it out, to make sure that all of these different elements are taken into account, and frankly, just to make sure that everybody knows who is going to be on the team that is going to ensure your success if you ever have to deal with an incident. Next slide. And then, basically, as we've said, for PCI compliant organizations, there are numerous frameworks and requirements that incorporate cyber incident response. And of course, PCI DSS is among them, as we've noted here, but also there's GLBA, HIPAA, state laws, GDPR, and more. And we're going to get into those as we go through our presentation.
So we're going to start with PCI DSS version 4.0. So PCI DSS 4.0 does require an incident response plan. This is required in previous versions of DSS as well. And it needs to have many of the same components that we've already just discussed, right? So it requires having roles and responsibilities, data backup processes, coverage and responses of critical system and components, and this plan must be activated during suspected or confirmed cybersecurity incidents affecting the card data environment. The plan must be reviewed and tested at least every year under version 4.0. In our experience, tabletop exercises is one of the better ways of testing that plan. Ideally, the tabletop exercise is based on current cyber threat intelligence, so it's a realistic risk that faces the company, and ideally it includes different components of the organization that have to be activated during an event, like legal, executive, security, and comms. So in addition, 4.0 requires designated personnel to handle the incident. They need to be available at all times per 4.0. This can be a third-party service provider or internal staff. I know Rapid7, for example, has a 24/7, 365 hotline for data breaches, and I'll say my own experience is, I'm doing my work at the firm, and I'm going to go home, and suddenly a client calls. They've had an incident, and boom, there goes the next 10 days. But that is the nature of the business. It does not come at convenient times. So being available to handle the incident at all times under 4.0. And this designated personnel must be appropriately trained on incident response capabilities. And the frequency of that training should be based on the risks to the organization, which harkens back to other parts of PCI DSS, which require risk assessments. And again, tabletop exercises, in our experience, have been a really effective way and cost-effective way of reaffirming those roles and responsibilities and ensuring that training is kept up to date on incident response. Another PCI DSS component focuses on when that incident response process is triggered. The incident response plan should be triggered when there's a flag for anomalous activity. This can include intrusion detection systems that provide an alert, user behavioral systems, network security controls. So flags for anomalous activity is when it happens, but beyond just the trigger, organizations also should have an escalation process for when those alerts are assessed to be serious. There's always going to be false positives. There's always going to be minor events that don't really turn into major cybersecurity incidents. But as we go through the scoping exercise, as we go through the enterprise investigation that we talked about before, there has to be a process for raising the profile of that information to senior executives and other parts of the team so that the incident can be handled according to its risks.
And Harley, I just want to add to that point a little bit, and you've raised this too, is that in terms of understanding your risk paradigm to when you need to escalate to senior leadership, that's also something that you're going to develop as you go through your plans and as you go through these tabletop exercises. These are not like cut and dry sort of signals in terms of like when do you you develop that. But that's kind of an internal sort of sensibility that as you're going through these planning exercises, and that's why there's a requirement to do so, is because you develop that muscle. Without that muscle, it's really hard to be able to say for your sector or for your industry what exactly that risk paradigm is as to when you need to bring in those different teams. And as you kind of share that information, you'll get a better sense of how do you develop that, and then when exactly does that trigger apply for when you need to then start to escalate, and then when do you need to bring in third-party teams, and then when do you need to maybe start to message things externally as well.
I completely agree. Every time that there's an incident, there is an element of chaos that's involved, but having that front-end prevention and that process in place is going to save you time and money when the incident actually occurs, because you don't want to have to figure out these things while it is happening.
That's right.
Incident response plans are not static documents. PCI DSS requires that the plan be updated to reflect broader developments as well as lessons learned. We live in a highly dynamic technological environment. Cyber threat actors are developing all the time. Technology is developing all the time. Obviously, AI is now a big component of that development, that evolution. And so as these cyber risks evolve, as these cyber threats evolve, our preparation must evolve in order to keep pace as well. Another PCI DSS 4.0 provision focuses on triggering the incident response procedures when the primary account number is discovered any place that it's not supposed to be. Now, this is different than getting an alert through your system, right? This is not an intrusion alert, but rather, maybe through dark web scanning or other services, the primary account number is discovered to be someplace outside of the card data holder environment. So if the primary account number is discovered outside the cardholder data environment, the organization should attempt to locate how this occurred and whether there has been a leak or a successful attack that resulted in that number being where it's not expected. So we focused a lot just now on DSS 4.0, of course, but we also wanted to quickly touch on how some of those requirements align with incident response requirements in other regulations as well. In general, if you are following the requirements of PCI DSS, you're going to be halfway, if not fully, on your way to being compliant with a number of other regulations because they require incident response plans as well. Just one example here is the Gramm-Leach-Bliley safeguards rule. So this applies to non-banking financial institutions. There's a lot of overlap with the PCI community. And it requires having a written incident response plan. And similar to PCI DSS, it requires certain elements to be part of that plan. So internal processes for responding to a security event, clear roles and responsibilities, a communications plan, and ability and capability and processes for remediation and backup, and revising the plan as necessary after the event has been mitigated. An additional regulation that is relevant here, SEC and Sarbanes-Oxley. So here, this applies to organizations that are under SEC jurisdiction. So these are public companies. So this will include both parts of the PCI community, but also PCI clients. And here, Sarbanes-Oxley, according to the SEC, requires organizations to maintain effective controls and procedures to enable the timely disclosure and escalation of material information. That material information includes cybersecurity information. So if there is a cybersecurity event, organizations are expected to have internal processes for bringing that material information to senior management for assessment to determine whether or not it is material. And then, if it is material, in general, that information must be disclosed by that public company. It's disclosed on a Form 8K, which is a contemporaneous disclosure, within 4 business days of determining that it is material. And then subsequent disclosures have to be made on an ongoing basis. What we have found is that even though Sarbanes-Oxley and the SEC don't necessarily require all the components of an incident response plan, in order to fulfill these requirements accurately, like putting out an accurate 8K, you do need to have a good incident response plan so that you know what the scope is and you know what the nature of the compromise, and so you're able to report that accurately to shareholders. Finally, wanted to touch on the New York Department of Financial Services cybersecurity regulation. This applies to any organization that is licensed and regulated by NYDFS. So this is a state regulation, but includes a lot of banks, financial institutions. And here, there is a detailed incident response requirement. So not only is there a requirement to have an incident response plan with many of the components that we've discussed, but also a business continuity and disaster recovery plan, so beyond just cybersecurity. These plans must be tested at least annually. And here too, they require reporting of cybersecurity incidents within 72 hours and notice of an explanation whenever there's an extortion payment that is made. So again, as we had discussed, you want to have plans and processes in place beforehand so that you can go through this without scrambling, without being caught unprepared.
So, I think as we've sort of talked about, incident response planning is a muscle. It's good to exercise it, not in the middle of the marathon, but sort of in short stints for when you need to do the training previously. Part of that, again, from an operational perspective, is developing that plan. What are the guidelines? What are the North Stars? What are the things that should help develop that plan from an operational overview lens, but also, more importantly, from your particular capacities as a company? And I think that is where there's a little bit of this kind of perception that we'll be able to just follow a check mark and a checklist and then we'll pull it out and we'll go through it. But I think some of these plans have to be kind of in the flavor of the way that you as a company, you as an organization, just do a lot of the kind of team building, getting to know your peers and others that are going to be in the trenches with you if an incident were to happen. And part of that is, again, business continuity. That should probably be the main North Star, is that you want to make sure you're able to do the things that you need to do to get the business back up and running. But again, you're going to be guided by regulations and best practices. And those best practices can be influenced by, again, your third-party stakeholders, your vendors, the folks that you're going to be using while you're doing this. And more importantly, do you actually want to have an in-house team that's doing it or an external team that's doing it, like what Rapid7 provides, for example? But I think outside of that, we're talking about organizational structure too. Where is this going to sort of live from a project management perspective? A lot of times it lives under the CISO, but sometimes it can work also under your comms teams or your legal teams or some other third party that's kind of your incident response vendor that you have hired. And so I think in that way, sort of understanding that at the front end rather than the back end will really help you determine and decide what kind of plan do you want to have that's living, breathing, and is capable to meet the moment. Cross-team collaboration is really important here, and don't think that cross-team collaboration is the usual suspect. A lot of times legal, comms, customer relations, investor relations, senior leadership all have different ways in which they communicate. So making sure that you understand those communication cadences, the ways in which they communicate, the channels in which they communicate, how do you want to make sure that you also protect a lot of the documents and a lot of the conversations you're having. Make sure you get that stuff done before you actually have to do something in the middle of an incident. Some successful approaches, obviously, is to make sure that your plan is clear, your plan is adaptable. Obviously, every incident is different, it's unique, but there's some things that are just you're going to have to do regardless of what kind of incident there is. There's going to have to be communication. You're going to have to think about the different regulations that you have to meet, the different standards. You're going to have to think about your technical teams as they're trying to find out what is happening and when, and to make sure that they're available 24/7 are some of the ways that you can start to think about the guideposts that'll help you develop your plan that is going to be adaptable. Making sure that it's integrated into your business processes. Teams are going to need folks to be able to live and breathe this plan if they need to make sure that they have team capacity to be able to do something when that happens. Strong governance, this is going to come from multiple places to think about not only the regulations, the community best practices, but then also what self-standards do you have to be able to do that. And then what compliance obligations are up to date, making sure that you actually have teams that are helping to understand that, to make sure that you understand what that actually looks like in practice rather than just reading it in the moment. It's going to be really, really important. And then frankly, some common challenges that Harley's already kind of talked about, but just to really bring it home, is that lack of a clear plan and lack of an understanding of the teams that are involved are probably the two biggest components and challenges that you're going to face in terms of having a comprehensive and a livable, adaptable, and actually comprehensive and good incident response plan. Unclear roles and responsibilities infrequent practice, and unprepared for the obligations that are going to make sure that your actual plan meets the needs of the moment are some of the challenges that you'll see without doing that planning before. And hopefully you won't ever have to do it, but if you have to do one and you have to deal with your planning and your process before an incident, you will be set up for success if you have to deal with an incident. So thank you all so much.
Thank you all.